It all starts with just one thing. When recycling, rinse out jars and cans, and avoid recycling wax paper or paper soiled with food. This will reduce recycling contamination. Find tips and more at onethingus.com. What's your one thing?
Slide here is your X. But if that's the call, Mike, Will, and Sam all have to know they're shifting. Open palms to post, thumbs ups to crosser, thumbs downs and out. Trevor, why don't you get up here and draw that for us?
Playing in the NFL is hard, but playing
armchair
fantasy football is easy.
Fantasy football time. It's fantasy football time.
You go 14 times and only win one time. It leaves a little sting. But I've said this. I know it's going to sound weird, but I've said this. If I had to go back to the future and know what the results were going to be and trade with the Marlins, who won twice and only went twice, I wouldn't do it. At the 14 times, still thinking that maybe fate might change. Going 14 years in a row is pretty incredible.
armchair.
It is
talk about the team, the myth, the legend that was the Atlanta Braves, team that an era, the Bobby Cox era, I guess is how I should put it. This team won 14 divisions in a row, but we only got the one World Series. We won the pennant in 91. We won the pennant in 92. We won the pennant and the World Series in 95. And then, of course, 96, we won the pennant. And 97, we came close. 98, we came close. 99, we won the pennant and lost the World Series. And then the Bobby Cox era finished off with the division titles, but never won another World Series. And the pennant's dried up as well. And one of the things that I always like to point to when people are talking about the Braves, and this got brought up, I actually had a listener that requested this in this Once Upon a Pastime series. We've done some other stuff, and they said, hey, what about talking about the Bobby Cox era? I believe the big reason why this was brought up because of that song 98 Braves. If you haven't heard it, Morgan Wallen made a song called the 98 Braves or 98. I'm not 100% sure the name of the song. I have heard it a handful of times. It's a good song. But after it was released and after I listened to it, and though it's a good song and I get it, I felt like that they pointed to the wrong season of the one that got away. So this is going to be our 6-pack to go today. Kind of a 6-pack of tall boys because we're going to dive into this of the 96 Braves, the 98 Braves, and other teams. Obviously, we're going to talk about the 95 Braves. This is the Once Upon a Pastime series of the best 5 Braves teams of the Cox era that didn't win it. We're going to start off talking about the 95 Braves because they did win it. And because they did win it, we're going to lead off with them, and then we're going to go and talk about teams. So obviously the 95 Braves who won it, you got to put them number one, but then we're going to go 6 through 2, counting upward on who were the best teams that never won it. And there's a lot of different factors that I went off on this, but when it's all said and done, this is my list, and I'm going to stick by it. This is the Bobby Cox era teams that made the playoffs, but did not win at all. So when you talk about the 1995 Braves, it was a big season in Major League Baseball because we were coming straight off the strike. And for Braves country, it brought us back. And that's what a lot of folks who are not Braves fans did not kind of grasp on how we could come back so quick. Well, when your team's that good and they're winning and it's fun again, yeah, at the beginning, you're still burned by it, but a lot of us came back by at least the end of the summer going, man, this team's got a chance. This team has a real chance. This team can go out and they can maybe do what the other teams couldn't do. You know, some notable transactions. Realize the season itself. And by the way, it was the 125th season of the franchise. 30th in the city of Atlanta. Still hadn't won a World Series. It was a strike shortened season. We only played 144 that year. But it was the best in the National League. And for the 6th straight season, the team was managed by Bobby Cox. And we started off. Does this not sound familiar with Atlanta Braves today? And Atlanta Braves, we started off kind of slow. We were 20-17, and then June 4th, behind the Phillies, behind the Expos, and we'll get into the 94 team in a bit, but the Expos and the Phillies were playing good baseball. Remember, the Phillies had knocked us out in 93 to go to the World Series. We were newly division rivals at that time. And the Expos led the NL East the year before. Though I still contend the Braves would have beaten them in the playoffs. And I think they would have caught them. They were only 6 back, and there were several games to go. But the overview of that 95 team, we beat the Rockies in the NL Division Series 3-1. Remember, that was the first time the wild card got introduced. Then we go into the NLCS, and everyone thought the Cincinnati Reds that year had a very good chance of at least giving us a good series, and we swept them. I was at Game 3 in Cincinnati. I was living in northern Middle Tennessee, and the girl I was dating at the time and my roommate, the three of us decided that the next day, let's go. We were listening to the broadcast from Game 2 and kept hearing about how there were empty seats all throughout the Cincinnati Reds Stadium. Riverfront at the time. It was an old football stadium. We got there, and then I kind of understood why people weren't excited to watch games in that stadium. It wasn't built for baseball. But it was weird that a city that was that big into baseball, that's a baseball city, Cincinnati. They had 0 fan support that day. And maybe it's because they were already down 2-0 and they were going to kind of wait to see how it was. But I remember constant reports of 30,000 tickets available for Game 3. I said, let's go. Let's go watch it. And the biggest thing I remember about that was we had went to extras, and Javi Lopez hit a home run. I believe it was a 2-run shot. And the Braves won, and then we drove back to the just north of Nashville is where I called home at the time. And we would go on to sweep that series. So I'm all in. I'm really, really jazzed up about the fact that we're going to the World Series, and I felt like this team could do it. Don't get me wrong. I had a lot of friends that had given up on baseball. They didn't care, but I had fallen in love with the sport by then, and really got into the whole weeds of who are we. I'd already started at that point. I'd already started, gathering information. You couldn't Google it like you could nowadays, but I was gathering information, books, anything I could get my hands on to teach me who the Braves were prior to my watching it. And then also, who were the Braves before they got to Atlanta. So I'd already gone all in on the Braves. Really ticked off at Tom Glavine because he was the team president, or not the team. He was the players rep. I don't know if the term was president, but he was the Max Scherzer. Every time that you saw a press conference, he was out there. He was head of the Players Association for the players. And so I watched that whole thing in '94, the whole weeds of the strike, and just ticked off at Glavine. And I've said this before, but I got really ticked off later on when he left several years later to go play for the Mets for what was a minimal more amount for an entire contract. And I remember at the time I was doing a radio show in northern Nashville, and I remember going through it and basically breaking down how stupid of a deal it was. And people would call in and say, "Oh, are you nuts? You would take the same." Like, no, I wouldn't, because at the time he took a minimal amount. I think it was like $200,000 or $300,000 more over the length of the contract. And my point was, if you stay in Atlanta and you invest your money, because I was using John Elway at the time as the template, because he had stayed in Denver his whole career, and he had all these car dealerships and whatnot. Like, you make a lot more money than that than going to New York and paying their ridiculous cost of living. And so anyways, so Glavine stuck in my craw for a while. I have since let it go. And I know he's come back and said down the road that he believes he made a mistake, that they made a mistake. And I get that at the time, but my point at the time was, I was younger than you, and I knew you were making a mistake. So I was ticked off about that. But that's not what this show is about. This show is about how damn good that 95 team was. The 1995 team, 90 wins and 54 losses. That doesn't jump out at you, but remember, we lost, 16 games? And at that rate, that probably would have been a 100-win team. In all likelihood, we would have finished somewhere in the neighborhood of 100, 102 wins. We go out and beat the Indians, and Tom Glavine's the one that slammed the door. So that started the healing process with me, and it wasn't until he left to go to the Mets that it basically opened up a new wound, or opened up an old wound, I guess. But we get 95, we get the ring, and I'm like, thank God, because when I was a kid growing up in the early 80s, I didn't think this team was ever capable of winning the World Series. Stuck with them through thick and thin. But I had not, first of all, I didn't know a lot about their history, but then the other thing is what I had seen. I saw them really good in 82 and then stink for a while. And you're like, my God, this team is just, and you're young and you're impatient. Like, this team sucks. And then you see it come full around. The only reason to watch them was the reason why I watched them essentially was because of Dale Murphy. Always. Now, I had a lot of other players that I loved, but Dale Murphy brought me to the sets in the 80s. The Winds brought everyone to the sets in the 90s. So that's the best team, and we could do an entire episode on that 95 team. But today we're going to talk about the others. And so who is my number 6 team? So it's a 6-pack. 95 Braves are at the top, and now I'm going 6 through 2. And the number 6 team is well, it is the team that the song was made of. And this is why I say that I think that they, solid song, but I think I would love it a lot more if they would have picked a team that really could have won it, really should have been there. And I've got one in mind that I'll hit at the end. And it's basically the number 2 team. And I would even take it to the number 3. I would have taken the number 4 team on this list and just shut up and moved on. But the 98 team, the one thing you cannot take away from the Atlanta Braves in 98, they went 106-56. And maybe that's why the songwriter, whoever, I don't know who actually wrote the song for the Wallen hit, but whoever the songwriter was, maybe that's why they went and grabbed. They said, you know what? This team made it to the NLCS. They had 106 games, one of the best regular seasons in the history of Braves baseball. Let's just grab them, right? Let's just grab them. Let's just go for that and just call it a day. And so, with all that being said, you go in here and you're like, all right, let's take a look at that team. Because I remember when the song came out, I was in shock that was the year. I was like 98. And then I went back and looked at it. Yeah, that was a good team. But you know what my biggest memory of 98 team was? The biggest memory that I have of the 98 team was not being able to get base hits in key plays against those Padres. That Padre team was good. And then the biggest take that I took away from the 98 team in general, the 98 season, is how we could not get base hits and we could not find a way to piece together hits to beat the Padres. And then they go out and get smoked by the Yankees. And the 98 Yankees, remember, looked upon by a lot of folks as the best team to ever play Major League Baseball. You can never argue. That'd be, it's an impossible argument to win, but they're in the conversation. So when I think of the 98 Braves, I'm like, we would have never beaten that Yankees team anyway. So who, I cared then, but now I'm like, we never would have made it. That would have been a better twist on the song, right? I thought we were going to make it. For people who aren't familiar with the song, he's comparing it to his love with the girl, and I thought we were going to go the distance, and we didn't go the distance like the 98 Braves. Fill in the blanks. But would have been a better twist on the song is I thought we were going to go the distance like the 98 Braves, but we never really had a chance. We weren't hitting Kevin Brown, and if we would have hit Kevin Brown, we damn sure weren't hitting the 98 Yankees. 98 Yankees, they were one of the most efficient teams in the history of baseball. And we all hated them, right? But the hate comes from a ridiculous amount of respect and jealousy that our team wasn't that good. Because back then, the disparity in the money spent wasn't quite as great as it is now. Like if you took the 2023 Mets, who were just dwarfing everybody in payroll, and had they gone out and won 120 games and swept through the World Series or anything like that, there'd be a lot of hate. But that's not how the 2023 Mets played out. Right? So the 98 Braves, really good team. When you look at the pitching staff, it was Maddox, it was Glavine, it was Denny Nagel, one of my favorite Braves players, just because I mimicked his train whistle when he came through. When he was traded to the Braves, he had a train when he was coming from the Pirates. He had mimicked a train whistle that I guess is a train that ran behind Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. And every once in a while, when I have a couple of spirits in me, I will let that train whistle fly. And my friends know that, D train's pulled into the station. But so I'm always going to be a Nagel guy, right? But Kevin Millwood, remember how good he was? My God. He went 17-8 that year. Maddox, 18-9. Glavine, 20-6. Was it Smoltz? Smoltz went 17-3. Jeez Louise, how did he not get more Cy Youngs? It was a little ridiculous, right? Maddox, 18-9 with a 2.22 ERA. I think Maddox would have had more Cy Youngs if people didn't just get Maddox fatigue. Remember, he'd won 4 in a row. And there came a point in time where they're like, we're not going to give it to you every year. You're going to have to be something special. You're going to, you're going to have to go 30-0 for us to give it to you ever again. So, I mean, we had guys in the relief pen that a lot of people forget about. We had El Presidente in the relief role. Dennis Martinez. Rocker had not quite hit the scene as the closer, but John Rocker was a really good reliever. I mean, he was, what did he go? I see the 2.13 ERA, 38 innings. And this is a blast from the past. This is a guy you don't think about, but he was really good in 98. Kerry Lightenberg was our closer. Man, that was a fun team. And as far as the offense goes in 98, you still had Javi behind the plate. You had Andres Galarraga, the big cat at first. I used to love to watch that guy hit oppos. Keith Lockhart was your second baseman. And though we loved Keith, that wasn't elite second base. Walt Weiss was the shortstop. We loved Weiss, but he wasn't elite, not offensively. Ryan Klesko was in left field. Andrew in center. Michael Tucker was your right fielder typically. And then, of course, the great Chipper Jones, Hall of Famer, was manning the hot corner. But your bench was solid, too. We had Ozzie Guillen on the bench. I mean, think about the guys that were on this team. Gerald Williams, who was good in his own right, very good. He hit 305 that year. Tony Graffinino, one of my favorite players there, just because I used to love to say Tony Graffinino. I'd get in arguments with guys. You get off Tony Graffinino. That's my guy. Tony Graffinino, by the way, hit 211 that year. Anyways, Danny Bautista. Remember him? And so, it goes on and on and on. Rafael Belliard. When you go through here's a guy I'd forgotten about, Randall Simon. Remember, that was the John Rocker controversy. He was talking about Randall Simon. We'll definitely do that in a Once Upon a Pastime. Mark DeRosa played a handful of games that year. So when you look at this team and you look at the how good it was very good. But I'm putting them at number 6. All right, let's go to the next one. All right. Next team that I have on our docket is the 1994 Braves. What? Season ended in a strike. To hell with them. Yeah, I know. I get it. But they were really good. And I don't know if the 94 Braves would have ever caught the Expos. But remember, wild card was supposed to start anyways. Didn't start till 95 because of the because of all the labor stoppage, but team would have made it into the playoffs. And we probably, the way it would have set up at the time, we would have faced because remember back then you faced the team in the division because they were trying to prevent two teams from basically the West Coast facing off in the CS because they didn't want those kind of ratings. Nowadays, all that's changed, but at the time, it would have been Braves versus Expos. And I felt like in a 5-game series, the Braves actually had the upper hand. We had a little better starting pitching. But the 94 Braves, that's one of those arguments that we can go into the weeds for a long, long time with. But the 94 Braves, this is what they did do. They were 68 and 46, and they really started catching fire towards the end. And though they only played 114 games, they were third in Major League Baseball in the record department. Now, a team that I did not put on this list that's one of my favorite teams, I just want to mention them real quick, are the team the year before, the 93 Braves, the ones that came back. It was the last great pennant race. And much like what we saw last year, when the Braves ran out of gas after catching the Giants, what we saw in the 2022 season, the Braves ran out of gas chasing down the Mets and faced the Phillies, and they faced the Phillies in 93. So it's really look, it's really weird that it would be 30 seasons later, but they ran out of gas and got beat by a lesser Phillies team in 2022, and they ran out of gas and lost to a lesser team in 1993. 1993 Phillies, they were a ragtag bunch that were fun for everybody to watch and pull for, but they were not better than the 93 Braves. And they went in and they gave the Blue Jays, and that was the famous Joe Carter home run, but they gave the Blue Jays actually a pretty good fight in the World Series. The 93 Braves would have beaten the 92. The 93 Braves would have beaten the 93 Blue Jays. They were built to beat them because they lost to the Blue Jays in 92. But back to the 94 Braves, I just think this team was really good. And though we were 6 back, we were 2.5 in front of the wild card, in front of the Astros and Mets. And we were about 500 against Montreal. We were 4-5. So like I said, it would have been nip and tuck, but I do believe the Braves would have beaten Montreal in the playoffs and would have went to the World Series. But this team, not a whole lot to go over with them because of the fact that there were no playoffs. But this team did have Deion Sanders. This team did have Roberto Kelly. They platooned out in the out in the center field. David Justice, Ryan Klesko, Terry Pendleton picking it at third. Terry Pendleton would go on to win the MVP the next year for the 95 Braves. I think I failed to mention it that 95 Braves, Maddox won the Cy Young, Glavine won the World Series MVP. But this team, Jeff Blauser. Remember Jeff Blauser? I was a huge Jeff Blauser guy. Because Blauser was there when we were stinky, and then he was there when we made the transition to very good. Same thing with Mark Lemke. We had Fred McGriff, the crime dog, one of my favorite players of all time. Man, was he on fire when he came over in the trade. Oh, my word. Braves rode those coattails that year. Javi Lopez behind the plate. and other guys. And of course, this was the team that had Steve Avery and Kent Merker along with the big three in the rotation. I think those of us that were growing up at the time, like, we always think of those two guys being with the big three for a long time. They really weren't, as you'll see as we go through these different years. But it's a lot of fun to think about how good that team was. The team that, the player that they leaned on as far as the saves that year was actually Greg McMichael, though Mark Wohlers was the setup man. And you could see Mark Wohlers coming. You knew Mark Wohlers was going to be something. Of course, Mark Wohlers got the last out of the 95 series. Remember Bedrock, Steve Bedrosian? I was so happy when he came over to Atlanta because I loved his nickname, Bedrock. Followed his son for a while. He was in the Angels organization. I don't know where he is nowadays, but Mike Stanton, remember him? Very good reliever. Then we let him go to the dirty Yankees. What are we doing? What are we doing? When people ask me more and more about why did that team did not win more championships, there's one common denominator. And I know we didn't have the greatest offenses every year, but that was kind of the era. You didn't score a ton of runs. So it's not like the 2020 era Braves, the 2020s era Braves, where you have all this offense. The era, like, you could have picked apart a lot of the offenses in the days. We did not win because John Sherholtz never understood that he needed to make that bullpen the priority. They were always, because look, they looked at it as if you have Glavine, you have Maddox, you have Smoltz, and you have two more solid starters, you're going to run away with the division. And you're going to get in the playoffs. When you get in the playoffs, you got to find a way to win. And I think a lot of the thought process, too, was you can transition one of the guys into the bullpen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The teams that dominated in the mid to late 90s and on through since understood, like the Yankees, understood you have to prioritize, the bullpen, because if not, you're not going to win the games late. And you usually have to have those late wins. It's going to be extremely rare for a team to cruise in the playoffs and the World Series and not needing a great bullpen. That's why, still to this day, it's my favorite saying of all time. Two most important things in life: a great friends and an even better bullpen. But this was a fun team. This team could play. And this team, when you looked at, it's unbelievable back then. You look at in today's game, if you open up any year of recent memory, your team pitching on Baseball Reference, and it's going to be a laundry list about the size of your arm. The guys that pitched in 1994, I'm using as an example, we had the 5 starters that averaged 25 starts apiece for the big ones. Smoltz only 21. And then you had Merker with 17. You had 5 bullpen guys and 3 other that were used sparingly. It's really amazing. Nowadays, it is literally like the size of your arm. Now, you had a handful that I haven't mentioned yet, but they were used, extremely. Brad Woodall, Milt Hill, Greg Olson, Mike Bielecki. But that was the 94 team in a nutshell. Maddox won the Cy Young that year. And remember, he had just come over from the Cubs And man, we were ready to rock. We were ready to roll. We were ready for the Atlanta Braves to make that run into the postseason. I could not wait. I was ecstatic. It was, pins and needles. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. Let's win it. Let's do it all. Maddox had come over in 93, but remember that was the year that we just spit the bit. So we were chomping at the bit. What's it going to look like to get in the World Series? Because we didn't make it in 93. What was it going to be like to get Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz in there? And we never got to see. We never got to see it, unfortunately. So that's the number 5 team. So number 6 was 98. Number 5 was 94. It's going to take a quick break. When we come back, the number 4 team, and a team that I think is still very dear to us all, be back in a flash here on Braves Country, Once Upon a Pastime series.
They've given me less than 1 year to turn this place around. Forget about the way it used to be. This is not a damn democracy. We are in a state of emergency, and my word is law.
Don't miss a moment of heart-stopping NFL coverage on Armchair Quarterback Radio.
Riggins. He's going to go all the way unless Blackwood can catch him, and he can't.
3rd and 3. We'll see a pickup sometime on the right side, possibly. Montana looking, throwing in the end zone. Dwight Clark.
Only 12 seconds left to play third quarter. Here's Marcus Allen cutting back upfield, and Marcus Allen could be gone. 74 yards for Marcus Allen.
The quiet man of this football team, Scott Norwood. He can fire the shot heard round the world now. Here we go with 8 seconds to play. High drama here on the Super Bowl. But in the air, it's got the distance. Here it is.
2 last questions. The combine, what was that experience like for you?
You don't know me, do you?
Huh?
You don't know me, do you? I never went to a combine.
You didn't go to the combine. How about the draft?
I never got drafted.
Then I know. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Armchair.
It's a pastime, something you do. It's entertainment, something you watch. And it's a shared experience, something you talk about and read about. And that's marvelous. But you can apply those same 3 criteria to other things. What makes baseball special is that it's the best game that's ever been devised.
You're listening to Braves Country Baseball on Braves Country HD. Welcome back, and we are doing our Once Upon a Pastime series, one that I enjoy quite a bit. I hope y'all are getting something out of it too. And this time it is the Braves, the best teams that never did it. If you assume that the 1995 team is the greatest because they did it, these are the ones that never did it. This is the Bobby Cox era, is how I should word that. So number 4. Number 6 was 98 team, 98 Braves. Number 5 was the 94 strike shortened season Braves. Number 4, 1991, the Atlanta Braves, and what they brought to the table. It was a magical team, and that one that I think we'll all cherish, because, well, for one, it was worst to first. So no one even imagined going into the 91 season, if you were a Braves fan, any kind of a fan of Major League Baseball. By the way, I don't want to forget to mention, I just didn't put them on here because you know the list can go on and on when you got 14 teams that won the division. One of my favorite moments is not on one of my favorite teams or one of my top-ranked teams. Came the year after when Sid slid. I think a lot of us forget, kind of mix it together, because the 91 and 92 team both beat the Pittsburgh Pirates in 7 games of the World Series, and both of those teams lost the World Series. But I think what made that Sid slid, where were you when Sid slid, what made that special was because of the 91 team, and we wanted to get back and prove that we were the team. We could kick their butts. Plus, Bobby Cox was a Brave, and he had been a Blue Jay. There were so many intertwined things there. And we got into that 92 series, and I remember thinking really quickly, and maybe something took him out of the 97, or excuse me, the Game 7 in the 92 series. 92 NLCS. Maybe they hit a wall there too, maybe the emotions, but I didn't look at that as much, because back then, there were no wild cards. So you just had the one series. Man, was baseball magical back then. If I could go back to that, I would, but we would have to, as they do in Major League Soccer, or major soccer around the world in different leagues, I guess is how I should term it. We have to start relegating some teams. Because I would love to go back to 2 divisions in each league, 2 divisions in the National League, 2 divisions in the American League, and the best 2 square off in the NLCS, ALCS, and then you get the World Series. That would be phenomenal. But they'll never put that toothpaste back in the bottle. But if I could do something for baseball, that would be one of the things I would do. But I would want to relegate it, because remember when they first started doing that, there were like 16 teams, then 20, et cetera, and goes on and on and on. Now we have 30. And I think to make that fair, if you're going to do that, I think you'd have to go down to 24 teams. Give me 6 teams in each division. To heck with the wild card, and let's go. Be even more phenomenal if it was 5, if you went down to 20. Holy cow. And then the relegation. You want to talk about something that would get eyeballs on the TV? Imagine if you were getting relegated, if you were not one of the top teams right now. New York Met fans would be losing their mind, and there would be no tanking. There would be no, okay, we're going to be everyone likes to point to them, so I'll go ahead and use that same example. But there would be no Houston Astros tanking, because you wouldn't want to get relegated. But anyways, when you look at the team, 91 team, it really was a special team. It was a team that went worst to first, and they became the first team in the National League to go from the last place one year to first place the next year. Now, granted, divisions were still pretty new, so it wasn't like they'd been doing this for 100 plus years with the same formula and all. No. But regardless, we faced the Twins in the 91 series. Nobody could beat the other team in their home stadium. And back then, you took turns. On the odd years, you were at home if you're in the American League. On the even years, you were at home if you're in the National League. 4-3. Still, I still think that was a pretty fair way to do it. It was frustrating for that particular series. It was frustrating for the 87 series for the St. Louis Cardinal fans. Same thing. They're playing Minnesota. Minnesota had a heck of a home field advantage. I won't call it unfair, because all is fair in love and war in baseball, but they had that dome that trapped all the noise in, and when their fans would come out and start rattling that place with those Homer hankies, those white Homer hankies, it was just a sea of white hankies, white towels. They might have called them something else, but I've always called them Homer hankies. I believe that was the term that Minnesota used, but they would just start rattling them and they would start yelling, and you couldn't hear yourself think in the place. And they won every single game in Minnesota, including the final game that the Braves lost 1-0. What an incredible game. If you're a Braves fan and you never saw it because you were too young, you got to go back and watch it at some point. Just jot it down. It's one of the greatest game. I still say it's the greatest World Series game ever played, even though we ended up on the losing end of it. John Smoltz, Jack Morris going the distance. Braves lost it 1-0. And the game itself was just so nip and tuck. It was 0-0. It was a 1-0 walk-off for folks that don't remember it. The Braves had the outfield pulled in and a runner on third, so anything hit deep they knew would score. So it ends up being a long, long single that wins it. But it essentially would have been a fly ball. And Atlanta, Game 7. First of all, Game 6, Game 7 of the NLCS. Let's go into the fact that the Braves went in to Game 6 of Three Rivers Stadium after, if you go back to the actual NLCS, the Braves lost the first game in Pittsburgh 5-1. The second game we win 1-0 off of Steve Avery. Tom Glavine lost the first one. Then in Game 3, you're thinking the tide has turned because it's a 1-1 series, and we go into Atlanta, and boom goes the dynamite, 10-3. Let's get it. John Smoltz went out there and did John Smoltz type things. And then Game 4, you're figuring we've got a good chance. Charlie Leibrandt was on the mound. Went 6 2/3. But we lose in extra innings 3-2. The loss was given to Kent Marker. Of course, he was coming out of the pen, but he was a starter. And we go Game 5, and we're all right. We're going to have to go on the road into Pittsburgh. We know that, but we need to win Game 5, because if we win Game 5, we just got to get one dub up there. And Pittsburgh scores one run in the 5th inning, and Tom Glavine loses again. I remember people wanting to kill him. Like, my God, dude, he only gave up the one run. Got to score. And that leads into why in 95, Glavine, remember the famous Glavine speech in the dugout in the middle of the Game 6 World Series against Cleveland? He's dealing, and he went into the dugout. They said around 4th or 5th inning. Maybe it was even later. And he said, is anybody going to get us a damn run tonight? Because they damn sure ain't scoring on us. And then a little while later, Justice hits the solo shot, the game-winning RBI, it turns out to be, and he went into the dugout and said, is that good enough for you? And they said, Glavine, very stone-faced said, that'll get it done. That'll do. So he's already frustrated that he's not getting run support, and he goes back to then. But we go into Game 5, we lose. We're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're down 3-2. We're going to Pittsburgh. We're going to win both in Pittsburgh. And here comes Steve Avery again. Avery, by the way, in game 1 went 8 1/3 scoreless. The save, remember Alejandro Pena? So game 6, we're like, what are we going to do? We're going to do, they got Doug Drabeck on the mound. Doug Drabeck was phenomenal. Steve Avery, he goes out there and spins shutout baseball again. Pena gets a save. We win 1-0. And that's why a lot of kids growing up at that time, Avery is their guy. Because they remember that. They remember stepping up big in the playoffs. We're like, what? All right, we're going to head into game 7. But Pittsburgh had set up where John Smiley was going to be their guy. And John Smiley had a heck of a year that year. And we're going up with John Smoltz. Game 7, let's go. And this is where the legend really begins with John Smoltz. John Smoltz goes out there and shuts out the Pirates. Braves win it 4-0. We go to the World Series. We meet up with the Twins. It's in Minnesota. Lee Bryant gets taken out in game 1 with Jack Morris. Jack Morris was phenomenal. It took way too long to put him in the Hall of Fame. Game 2, Kevin Tapani beats Tom Glavine. Once again, Tom Glavine takes another loss. See, this all builds into why he was so fired up in 95 in that dugout. But he pitched well. It wasn't like he didn't pitch well. Braves lost that game 3-2. We go back to game 3, and the Braves end up winning that one in extra innings 5-4. Dramatic walk-off fashion. And wouldn't you know, home runs by David Justice and Lonnie Smith. Lonnie Smith. More on that in a second. Then in game 4, the Braves win in Atlanta 3-2. Another walk-off job. I mean, this was a heart attack team. And we got Glavine going to the hill like, man, Glavine's going to lose again. He's going to pitch well. He's not going to get any run support. He's going to lose again. We're done. And the Braves' offensive explosion, 14 runs. 4 in the 4th, but the nail in the coffin, because it was still 5-3, were the 6th that we put up in the 7th and then added 3 in the 8th. 14-5. We go in back to Minnesota, and even though we hadn't won a game there, what my mindset was, everyone's mindset was, we just went in to Pittsburgh and won 2 games in the NLCS. We just need 1 this time, baby. Let's go. Let's get it. We go to extra innings. This is the game that's forgotten about. We go to extra innings. Minnesota wins in a walk-off. 11th inning. That's the one everyone forgets about. Then Jack Morris and John Smoltz duel to a 0-0 tie heading into extra innings. Alejandro Pena gets the loss. A lot of folks feel like Smoltz they should have stuck with Smoltz, but Morris went 10. Alejandro Pena was on the mound when the Braves lost. But you look, Pena had pitched well all year. And giving up 1 run on a sac fly, I mean, at some point you got to freaking score. And for the first time since 62, 7th game of the World Series ends in a 1-0 score. It was also the second time ever that all 7 teams won. All 7 games were won by the home team of the World Series at that time. Only other time was 4 years later when Minnesota did it to the Cardinals. So there you have that. So we got the 90-91 Braves. Pendleton won the MVP that year. Glavine won the Cy Young. Bobby Cox won the manager of the year. Why he didn't win more was ridiculous. It was one of those things where they're like, oh, you've got a great team. Bobby Cox should have won like 10 managers of the year in his time in Atlanta. All right, let's go ahead and transition into the next year, the number 3 team of all time. We've already named 95 as the number 1, so we've only got 2 of these left. Who's the number 3 team of all time? in the Bobby Cox era. All right. Get it. 1997. The 1997 Atlanta Braves. The team, I call it the Eric Gregg team. Right? Gregg screwed us. Gregg absolutely screwed us. This was the team in 97. We were coming off that loss in 96, and we're like, man, we should have won that. Let's get it. Let's right the ship. Kenny Lofton was on the team. Michael Tucker. I was a big Michael Tucker fan. I would be fans of the most obscure players, but I loved watching Michael Tucker. If you have speed and you're in the outfield, I usually like, ooh, look at him. I liked Lofton until I heard that he was kind of a problem in the clubhouse. I believe at the time I was a Lofton fan. I think it was one of those things where it's revisionist history and you remember down the road and you think you didn't like him at the time, but I liked him at the time. And Lofton, remember, was coming off that 95. We'd seen him in 95 with the Indians. I still love the idea of a true leadoff hitter. Don't get me wrong. Acuna's great. I would never trade Acuna for anything in the world. But I love a true leadoff hitter, a guy that gets on with his speed to set the table. I wouldn't change Acuna being our leadoff. I'm just telling you, just as an old school guy, there are guys in Major League Baseball that I've been fans of over the years. And it's a lot of them are the true leadoff hitter. Vince Coleman, obviously Ricky Henderson, but Ricky Henderson, people liked him so much. He was so popular. It was almost like a Michael Jordan type thing. Like, it seems like low hanging fruit. So I'm not going to be a fan of that guy. It's too easy to be a fan of his. Let me be a fan of a guy that people don't realize as good as he was. And of course, that team had Javi. They had Blauser. They had Klesko, McGriff, Chipper. John Smoltz was the opening day starter because he had won the Cy Young the year before. The 97 team, 101 wins, 61 losses. And you look at how good that team was. Man, oh man alive. Divisional series. Remember, the National League Divisional Series was a best of 5. And the Braves swept Houston, though 2 of those games were close. And back then it was weird. You would play the first 2 at home, and then you would play the next 2 on the road. And if there was a game 5, it would come back. So by then they'd straighten it up. But there was a time where they had it. I forget what year was it they were trying it, but they had a situation where you started on the road the first 2. And you then had the last 3 at home. It was somewhere, I believe it was the Nationals doing it to the Reds or the Reds doing the Nationals. I remember that was the series where one of them had a commanding lead and then they went back to Cincinnati. And one of those 2 teams won the next 3. I believe it was the Reds doing it to the Nationals, but I could be wrong on that. I just remember that kind of changed the equation again. But Braves won the first 3. And so adios. The NLCS. Braves go out. And first game in Atlanta, Marlins win it 5-3. Second game in Atlanta, Braves win it 7-1. Third game in Florida, Marlins win it 5-0. Or excuse me, 5-2. What am I saying? Then the game 4 tied up the series at 4-0, and then Marlins win 2-1. Marlins win 7-4. The 2-1 game, which really swung the series, that was the famous Eric Gregg game, because he had a strike zone east to west that went dugout to dugout for Livan Hernandez. Greg Maddux was on the hill for that game. Pulling up the stat box right here. So it's been a while since I've looked at this. I want to make sure that I've got it right. But the Braves, by the way, it's interesting. In that series, the Braves outscored the Marlins 21-20, but they lost the series 4-2. But this was the Livan Hernandez. He replaced Kevin Brown. That's what I was trying to remember. Was he supposed to be the starter? He replaced Kevin Brown, who had been sick, and the Braves threatened immediately with Kenny Lofton getting on, and then a triple by Keith Lockhart. Look, it was 1-1 after 2, and then they started dealing. They started unbelievably doing the wide strike zone by Eric Gregg, and you can go back and look this up. It was absolutely asinine. And Maddux got absolutely screwed in this whole deal. And when you look at the fact that Livan Hernandez, at that time, man, he was nobody. He was a young stud, but he was a nobody. And he was getting this huge strike zone, and Maddux was getting squeezed. I'd still like to know, was there some beef internally between, because back then it was a thing. They didn't have the StatCast zone and whatnot. Man, if they did, they probably need to go back and redo that somehow. But you could go in and look, if an umpire didn't like you, they would squeeze you. And yeah, you wonder if Eric Gregg had a beef with Maddux, a personal beef, because that was what lost us the series. We win that game. We're up 3-2, and we're going back to Atlanta. And by game 6, Kevin Brown, who was very good at that time, he went up against Glavine, and Glavine just, Glavine didn't have it 4 runs out the gate, and that was it. But that was a great, great team, a great team. And one that still gets me, mainly because of this. The 97 Marlins go on to win the World Series on the walk-off. That's a famous Renteria walk-off against a Cleveland team I know we would have smoked. We wouldn't have went to 7 games against that Cleveland team. That Cleveland team in 97 was not as good as the Cleveland team in 95 that we beat. And the Braves team in 97 arguably was just as good as the team. The 97 team was just good as the team in 95. Is the point I'm trying to make. That Braves team was damn good. And so I'm still, my God. I would have written a song about the 97 Braves long before I would have written a song about the 98 Braves. Once again, we were never beating Kevin Brown. and the Padres, who had incredible pitching. And if we did find a way to squeak through that, we were never touching the 98 Yankees, who had the best team ever. Most people believe that's the best team in the history of a modern baseball. And it's just, I'll never get over that Eric Gregg game. It doesn't matter what you throw at me. I'm always going to say, yeah, but dude, we should have had that 97. Because of Eric Gregg and that stupid, it wasn't like one team blew up the other. That game was nip and tuck. Game 6, you almost felt like you'd lost the series because of Game 5. I remember distinctly it was a day game. I know exactly where I was when watching. I was at work that day. I didn't do much work, but I was physically in the building, and it was a little steakhouse bar that was in at the time a small town outside Nashville, Tennessee, and now it's a fairly big town, home of Middle Tennessee State University. But there's this little bar. Company no longer exists, but it was a little Cattleman's Club cantina, but it was a steakhouse. It was one of those old school ones, the peanuts on the floor. And I remember just chucking peanuts every time stupid Eric Gregg was blowing a call. And I think some of it had to do, it was hot in Florida and his fat ass didn't want to be back behind the plate. I'll never forgive Eric Gregg for that. Don't care. Don't care what you at me with. I will never forgive Eric Gregg for that. He will always go down the annals of Atlanta Braves lore is the reason for the one that got away. Marlins should never have 2 World Series. It should be 1, because we would have been at 3 games to 2. Probably would have played a lot looser in Game 6. May have won it. We definitely would have won Game 7. Game 7 would have been Smoltz. You beating Smoltz in Game 7? Marlins going to beat Smoltz in Game 7 in Atlanta? Get out of here. No way. That's why that game was so huge. We knew that it was going to be, when we thought it was Maddox versus Brown going to Game 5, and then they switched at the last minute, I was like, this is the series. Because Glavin's probably not going to outpitch Kevin Brown, who was phenomenal. He was more devastating in 98, but he was really starting to, that guy had a fastball. For people who don't remember, that guy had a fastball that would hit 98, 97 on the radar, and a sinker that would drop just before it got there, about 7 to 8 miles off. So he was coming around 97, the sinker coming in around 90, and you could not decipher the two. If you got ahead in the count, you were screwed. If you sat there and took it, that's the time he'd throw a bean right there on the corner, strike 3. He could throw a 97 on the black away from the batter anytime he wanted to. And we found out down the road he was doing PEDs. Was he doing that year? I don't know. But the point is, we had to have that Livan Hernandez game. And Livan Hernandez was wild. He wasn't hitting the zone. And if we were getting those walks, those turned into runs, and we don't lose 2-1, we probably lose. I've calculated before, we would have scored about 6 runs in that game. There's no way you're getting that on Maddox, because he was pitching well. And if you're going to give that strike zone to the Marlins, then you got to give it to Maddox, and he was not getting it. All right, end rant. Had to get that off my chest, though. I'll never be done with that. Screw you, Eric Gregg. All right, let's take a real quick break. We're going to talk about the best team that never did it. But, man, we almost. Be back in a flash here on Braves Country Today's Once Upon a Pastime series.
Let me tell you something. If the U.S. government decides to stick a tracking device up your ass, you say thank you and God bless America.
Hey, Braves Country. Braves Country HD is bringing you Braves Country Baseball. Braves Country comes to you every Tuesday night and Friday night and 2 bonus games every week. Hi, I'm Mac McGee, and we'll be bringing you play-by-play, pitch-by-pitch of your Atlanta Braves. It's free to listen. Please like and subscribe. YouTube.com/@Braves Country. Braves Country Baseball for the fans, by the fans.
This portion of the show is being brought to you by The Best Things in Life, which are still free with minimum purchase at participating dealers.
I'm drinking wine on a Wednesday before noon, bro. Have fun at your job, LOL. Link in bio.
It all starts with just one thing. Glass jars can be reused to store food and spices, as a holder for combs and brushes in the bathroom, or as a container for plants and homemade candles, in addition to simply being recycled. Find tips and more at onethingus.com.
It's the game my father taught me how to play. It's time I saw things on a level plane. Something was rolling towards me, and it said Spalding on it. I picked it up. Instinctually would push it back. And those days, those summer days became fall days, became our Sundays together with my brothers and I, and my dad whipping off his wicked curve. I just remember how my hands hurt. At first, as I was afraid of the ball and his coaching, you know, keep your shoulder in there. Don't bail out. It's not going to hurt you, you know. And that's what I remember.
You're listening to... All right. Best Braves team that never, ever won it, but shoulda. And I know most of y'all have already figured it out. But this was, this is the heartbreaker of heartbreakers. As mad as I got with the 97 team because of Eric Gregg and his strike zone, man, this one's all us. I mean, there's a lot of things you can point to, but it wasn't a goofy strike zone that had the Braves spitting the bit. Let's go into the 1996 Atlanta Braves. Chance to go back to back. We spit the bit. A lot like last year. I feel like if the Braves haven't gotten flat and they find a way to win that Phillies series, they're definitely beating the Padres. I think they would have had a very good chance to beat Houston in the 2022 season. They would have had a chance to go back to back. Different circumstances, because this Atlanta Braves team, who are coming up defending World Series champions, heavily favored in that year. We'll get into the World Series in a second. We were 2 wins away from pulling it off. This is why when they say 98 Braves, man, it's a great song. No, it was the 96 Braves. Bro, I'm sorry. The songwriter was 2 years younger or 2 years too young to know that was the team. That was the team, bro. That was the team. Ugh. If only I could sing or play a musical instrument or have any sort of talent, I would have written a 96 song that would have I forget the term they used, but would have been a rebuttal to his 98 song. And I'm not trashing his 98 song. I'm just like, dude, whoever wrote that is either extremely young in 98. It was like their first, that was the first year they remember, or they weren't really a Braves fan and they just knew that Braves country's worldwide and definitely country music worldwide. And they were just picking a team that won over 100 games. This 1996 Braves team won 96 games. That's another reason. Everything was set, man. The team won its 5th consecutive division because 94 didn't count because nobody won the division. So it was still considered. So it was the 5th year in a row, going for back-to-back. And here's the kicker. The Atlanta Braves, and this is one of the things that a lot of folks forget about in this one, but I remember this distinctly because my roommate at the time was a St. Louis Cardinal fan. His entire family, St. Louis Cardinal fans. And I was surrounded them daily. And I knew if we lost, I was going to have a really hard decision. Do I pull for the Cardinals or the Yankees in the 96 series? Remember, Yankees hadn't won a World Series realistically in my lifetime. They had won one in my lifetime, but I didn't start watching baseball, really getting into it until 82. Watched a little bit in 81, but 82 is when I really started getting into it. So I'd never seen the New York Yankees win a World Series, and I didn't know how awful it was going to be. Hey, Yankee fans coming at it. It was the same thing with the Red Sox fans. All in the South, all of a sudden you started getting guys and gals with these Yankees and Red Sox hat in the 90s, 2000s, even before the Red Sox actually won, but I remember distinctly when they won it. All of a sudden, these folks with deep Southern draws with Yankee and Red Sox gear, and I was like, dude, could you at least remember to take the tag off if you're going to jump on that bandwagon? I remember when we would see them later on, and they would be rocking something else, and the old joke was, "Man, did you hurt yourself? Did you twist an ankle or anything?" And they'd say, "What are you talking about?" Goes, "When you jumped off that bandwagon, because you sure did jump off quick." I remember a friend specifically in 04 was a Red Sox fan. I'll never forget this. In 04, they were a Red Sox fan. And as far as I know, they carried that until the Phillies got good, and the next thing I know, they were rocking Phillies gear in the late, 2000s. First decade of the 2000s. And I was like, "What are you doing?" "Oh man, I love the Phillies and ball." This is after the Red Sox had won too, and they'd been a Red Sox fan that whole time. And then all of a sudden, I just decided to grab a National League team. And of course, they didn't stick with it. But anyways, this is about the 1996 Braves. This team, Javi Lopez, Fred McGriff, Mark Lemke, Jeff Blauser, still with what I would call weak up the middle offensively. Defensively, very solid. And maybe that's what got us in the end. But Chipper Jones, Klesko, who was really good at the time, Marquise Grissom, Jermaine Dye. Man, was I a Jermaine Dye fan. And we had contributors like Terry Pendleton, Eddie Perez. At one point, David Justice. He gave us 40 games. Andrew Jones, 1996, became the youngest player to hit a home run. My boy, Tony Graffanino. He played, 22 games? Mark Whitten. Remember Mark Whitten? I remember him more being on St. Louis, but Mark Whitten played 36 games. Actually hit 3 home runs for us. In the pitching, John Smoltz, his Cy Young year, 24-8. He was on a tear in the middle of that year where he was unhittable. Greg Maddux went 15-11. Glavine, 15-10. All 3 of them with ERAs under 3. Steve Avery, Denny Nagel. Someone that I think a lot of folks have forgotten about, Jason Schmidt. He started 13 games for us. But that was the team. That was the team that should have won it. You look at that bullpen, Clance was nasty coming out of that bullpen. Old submarine guy. Pedro Borbon, Greg McMichael, and of course Wohlers, who could not slam the door. But the St. Louis series, the NLCS, will start with that. Braves win the first one 4-2. Smoltz, get it. And then Maddox comes out and spits the bit in game 2. That's in Atlanta. We're tied 1-1. Okay, it happens. Let's turn it around. We get into Busch Stadium. We lose a heartbreaker 3-2. Remember Dennis Eric Eckersley was on that 96 Cardinals team? He got the save, by the way, in that game. Game 4. Braves lose another heartbreaker. Tie game going to the bottom of the 8th, and we lose it 4-3. St. Louis and Brian Jordan beat us. Brian Jordan hit a home run in that game. Game 5. I feel like I skipped a game, but game 2, 3, and 4, 2 in Busch Stadium, 1 in Atlanta, go to St. Louis. No, I'm right. Okay. I thought I'd scrolled down too far. So there we are. We're down 3-1. And I was getting the crap from my friends. And they were really like an extended family. It was still close to those who are left to this day. And here we go. And this is one of the reasons why Cardinal fans from that era hate the Braves. People wonder why. This is why. We go in to game 5, and I remember looking at them. They were like, "You're 3-1. It's over, man. It's over. Game 5's in Busch Stadium. It's over. If not, we're up 3-1. You just need one more win." I said, "Oh, yeah? Well, who are you going to beat, my man? You going to beat Smoltz, Maddox, or Glavine? I need to know, because you're not beating Smoltz. Smoltz had that DNA. He had that playoff DNA. And then we're going to get back to Atlanta. Are you going to beat Glavine, or are you going to beat Maddox?" It was Maddox in 6, Glavine in 7. We absolutely smoked them. Those last 3 games, the Braves scored 32 runs. Cardinals scored 1. And the 1 run they scored, we were up 3-0 in the 8th, and they got 1 run in the top of the 8th. Well, actually, we're up 2-1. They got 1 run in the top of the 8th, and we answered back and scored. I remember going, that just took the air out of their sails. In an era where scoring was much more difficult. So we win that, and we're pounding our chest, and we're like, let's go. Offense is back. We're going to New York City. Take on the Yankees. Let's go defend the title. Let's get it. We go game 1. Smoltz on the mound. Boom! 12-1. Get it. It's over, baby. We're going to come rolling in. We're up 12. We win 12-1. We're up 1-0. Game 2, Maddox on the hill versus Jimmy Key, who, by the way, was a really good lefty at the time. We'd seen him with Toronto. Maddox actually goes out there and spins the gym, which he'd been known to not do in the playoffs. 4-0. We win. Boom! Up 2-0, and we're heading back to Atlanta. We just got to win two of the next 3, and we're back-to-backs, Jack. Game 3, David Cone versus Tom Glavine. Cone went out and pitched. Pitched himself a game. Yankees got it off. I just felt like that they left Glavine in too long. He pitched to the 8th inning, but that's what they did back then. And Glavine got the loss. And so we're still up 2-1, and we're like, that's okay. Gonna get it. We all right. And Steve Avery is on the mound for that game to get the loss. And the reason why this whole thing unfolded, when you pull up the box score, it doesn't tell the story. The Braves were up 6-0 in that game. 6-0. And the Yankees come up in the 6th inning and they score 3. They score 3 more in the 8th to tie it. And then we went to extras and they won it. But what the story of that entire thing is that stupid Jim Leyritz home run. That stupid Jim Leyritz home run. Just blasted it. And we're like, uh-oh. 6-0 heading into the 6th inning in that day and time. In that, today's game, you wouldn't really bat an eye about that. You'd be like, all right, we got the lead. We got to buckle down. 6-0 in that game. I'm going to tell you right now, everyone had just assumed it was over. Everyone just assumed it was over. 6 runs was a lot in Major League Baseball in that time. You didn't have home runs flying. This is just before the steroid era really took off, by the way. And this is before the expansion. So the pitching was really solid in Major League Baseball. And 6-0, you're like, man, we've got this. I ain't worried about this. Denny Neagle, by the way, was the actual starter in that game. But it was Mark Wohlers that was credited for the blown save. He gave up that home run. Avery lost the game in extras. So if you just pull out the box score, you're going to say, oh, look at there, Avery got the loss, blah, blah, blah. If they would have had, no. Denny Neagle was damn good that year. But Denny Neagle started to come apart at the seams. And then that 3-run blast by to this day, I can't see Joe Girardi without seeing that home run. Whole time he was coaching the Yankees, for the Phillies, I can't see it without seeing that home run. So anyways, that's the game that lost it for us. Now you can point to other things. You can go, no, but you still had a chance. Come back in game 5. I'm telling you, that it was like popping the balloon. Now we're down, or we're tied up at 1 apiece or 2 apiece. Game 5, critical game 5. We're like, we got to win this. We got to win this. It's the day after. I'm telling you, they were deflated. The offense, the bats weren't there. Smoltz went out there and pitched to Jim, gave up 1 run in the 4th, and the Braves didn't score. I'm telling you, they were flat. I remember them bringing it up at the time because we didn't score in the 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th, or 10th. So 5 innings the game before, and we get shut out. It was 14 innings. It got to 17 scoreless innings in the World Series. You're not winning the World Series doing that. Bats fell apart. So we go down. We're down 3-2. We got Maddox on the hill. You feel like you got a chance. And Maddox didn't pitch a poor game. Everyone thinks of him losing that game. He did give up the 3 runs in the 3rd, which is really what cost us. We were down 3-1 after 4. The Atlanta offense was just junk, and they didn't score. We scored 1 run. 1 run! After the 6th inning of game 4. That's the team, though. That's the team that should have won it. They were the best. The best that never got it. And I guess that's where we'll end this. As I hope you enjoyed this. This is a part of the Once Upon a Pastime series here on Braves Country. And y'all have a a great day. But don't sing a song about the 98 Braves. Sing a song about the 1996, 1997, the 91 Braves, the 94 Braves that could have won it, but it was a stupid strike. 98 should have been like a fifth sequel. Have a great day, y'all.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks for listening to Braves Country with Mac McGee and the Armchair Quarterbacks on 99.1 FM WQEE, The Key in Noonan, Georgia, and simulcasting on youtube.com/@Braves Country. Braves Country comes your way weekdays, 3 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern. Please follow, like, and subscribe today. Armchair Quarterback Radio, your first choice for Southern sports.
Something of the 5th of September. Something of the 5th of September. She said a lot that I can't remember. Something of the 5th. Can I get another cigarette, please? Can I get another cigarette, please? Yeah, I know I live to regret it. Just give me another cigarette, please. Can I get another cigarette, please?
You're listening to WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key